Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Philanthropy Roundtable's webinar on the storytelling gap, how the liberty movement can compete in culture and win. This is a huge topic that many smart and talented people have been thinking about, experimenting with, and making incredible progress on. But have we done enough? Many are concerned that our American values are disappearing, and this isn't just alarmism. There are literally conversations about reimagining our democracy in favor of collectivist and tribalist approaches to forming our society. So here at the Philanthropy Roundtable, we share this concern. Our focus is to support donors who are committed to advancing liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. For these to advance, it's important for people to understand what these are, what the debate is around them, and what a free society requires to flourish. So how do we better tell this story? How do we share our passion for what we truly believe are life-saving ideas that will lead to better outcomes for the greatest number? Joining us today are two dedicated and energetic people who have made solving this problem one of the main focuses of their waking hours. So first, we're going to hear from my amazing and talented colleague, Brandon Millett. He is Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Philanthropy Roundtable. Now, prior to joining us, Brandon served as COO for the GI Film Festival, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering a positive image for American service members through film, television, and live special events. He founded that group with his wife, Laura, who's an Army veteran. Now, before launching that film festival, Brandon served as senior writer and director of communications for Judicial Watch. He's also produced a documentary film, The Care They've Earned, and his media campaigns have earned coverage from many, many news outlets. So he's been doing this for a while. Glad to have him here. He'll be sharing his thoughts on why popular culture is a critical background in policy and politics. And he's going to provide a roadmap of how we might be able to overcome what now seems like a disadvantage when it comes to storytelling. Once Brandon has shared his thoughts, we're going to hear from Austin Berg. He is the Vice President of Marketing for the Illinois Policy Institute, and his work has been featured in The Economist, The Washington Post, and many Chicago-based outlets. He has also a two-time award winner with the Chicago Headline Club for his photojournalism work and was honored as one of Chicago's 20 in their 20s by Crain's Chicago Business. Co-author of the New Chicago Way, Lessons from Other Big Cities, and also a writer of a documentary film in 2016, Madigan, Power, Privilege, and Politics. So he too has been doing this for a while and worked with different media. So Austin will be talking about how advocacy organizations can think about storytelling as part of their content strategy. And we tell stories because they draw attention to our message. And by drawing attention to our message, we win in culture. So Austin will be sharing all of that with us. So it is time to get started. And I'm going to ask Brandon Millett to turn on his camera and his mic. I'll be back for the Q&A. And speaking of which, please do put your questions and comments in the Q&A box. We really want to make you part of this discussion, want to hear your perspectives and discuss these topics with you. So Brandon, welcome and take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Debbie, so much for the kind words and the introduction. I am so excited to be here with all of you talking about my most favorite subject, and that is storytelling, specifically how stories change our hearts and our minds. So overall, I have 5 main objectives for this presentation. First, we're going to discuss why popular culture is a critical battleground in politics. We're going to explain why the right is at a permanent disadvantage in culture and how to overcome it. We're going to show how the right's approach to persuasion can sometimes do more harm than good. We're going to teach the #1 factor that determines success in culture and how to use it. And we're going to provide a recent example of when the right competed in culture and won. And I want to start with a story. One Saturday morning, 15 years ago, my wife, Laura, and I were sitting around having breakfast and having a conversation. I was telling her about an article I had just read by Joel Stein in the Los Angeles Times that began, "I don't support our troops." Stein said military people may be tricked into serving by recruiters, but they still need to be blamed for pulling the triggers. Evidently, Stein believed that service members were both unintelligent and also immoral. My wife, meanwhile, had just watched a movie called Buffalo Soldier starring Joaquin Phoenix, and she was telling me how service members in the film were portrayed as drug dealers and thieves. Now, at the time, Buffalo Soldiers was just one of many films that were denigrating service members. In the Valley of Ella, GI murders a brother in arms. Redacted, GI sexually assaults a young girl. Stop Loss, GI goes AWOL. Home of the Brave, GI goes psychotic. One after another. Now, Laura was a graduate of West Point and an Army veteran, and she knew that these character portrayals bore no resemblance to the people with whom she served. I had a background in communications and psychology, and I felt like these films were having a corrosive impact on support for the troops, but also on troop morale. So we decided to do something about it. And since the problem seemed to emerge from within the entertainment industry, that's where we took our campaign. This campaign had two key components. Step one, we launched an independent film festival to flood the market with the alternative narrative. Over our dozen years, we helped bring to market over 400 pro-veteran films, with many earning distribution in theaters, online, in stores, and on television. Our content covered every film genre, every branch of service, and every major American conflict, and we also covered all the tough topics too. But while the lineup was diverse, all of our films had one thing in common. GIs were portrayed with respect. So here's a look at one of our festival trailers so you can see the type of content we featured.
Where that nuke is, I'd say you'd better start.
Oh my God!
We need someone to find the bomb without being detected, but it can't be any of you.
Damn it!
Once you go seek that help, it's crossing that LOD, but in a different way. You're not going after danger. You're going after love. You're going after caring. You're going after a family. You're going after what you need to be, to function, and to feel whole again.
There was over 7,000 Huey helicopters in the theater. That helicopter is actually the symbol of the Vietnam War. Fate, I believe, brought this crew together. Now brings us all back together with a ship some 4 years later.
You gave up on our whole family.
If you've ever worn a piece of jewelry for a really long time and unconsciously gone to move it even though you know it's not there, it's like the Phantom Limb.
In the summer of 1916, 2 college juniors from Yale started an air militia in preparation for America entering World War I.
They wanted to go fight for their country.
This is the most important op since the Bin Laden strike. This is an opportunity to cripple terrorism at its core.
And we're talking a risk assessment of over 70%.
With a reward of 100%, Major.
This is it, Jackie Dam. What's it all about?
Radio check at the bottom. I'll see you when you get back.
The location being minefield.
Someone's here!
Now, even though our films found success, we knew that if we were going to have lasting impact, we couldn't just lob bombs from the outside. We would have to learn how to work within the studio system as well. And this is the second component of our campaign. And I got to tell you, it was by far the more difficult of the two tasks that we faced. We approached this problem a few different ways. First, we courted mission-aligned actors, producers, and directors, and there were a few, people like Gary Sinise and Robert Duvall and Kelsey Grammer and Dale Dye. Second, we launched an initiative to help more military veterans find success in the entertainment industry. And then most importantly, we learned how to be of value to the studios in promoting military content, and this gave us leverage. And when the studios wanted to use the festival to promote their military content, we required that they send someone with the film to participate. Now, it could be an actor, it could be a producer, it could be a director. Our goal with this policy was to persuade influencers inside of Hollywood to become champions for service members and our festival. And let me tell you one story that shows how well this worked for us. I call it the disgruntled producer. One year, we agreed to promote a major historical studio film about the military. And per our policy, we requested someone from the film attend the screening. The studio decided to send one of the film's producers, well-known guy, and he wasn't happy about it. And I could see that in the email back and forth with the studio, which was sent to me by mistake. So we decided we would schedule his film for our Wounded Warrior Appreciation Night because nothing fixes a bad attitude like a meeting with a wounded warrior. We knew this from experience. So when the buses arrived from Walter Reed, we made sure that this producer was there to greet them. We also had him participate in a pre-film gathering and then join the troops for a reception after the screening and Q&A. The next morning at 8 a.m., we received a call from this producer. I'll never forget it. He said, guys, my wife and I were up all night talking about this event, and we're now consumed with finding a way to help these people, these amazing, incredible people. What can we do? That producer transitioned from a reluctant guest to one of our greatest champions in one night, and he would come back to the festival to teach a filmmaker boot camp for wounded warriors year after year. Now, I want to stop here, and I want to ask a rhetorical question that we're going to explore in the next section. Which changed first, his heart or his mind? So now I want to introduce you to a rational model for how people might make decisions. I call it the spin cycle. So if you start right at the top with step one, a fact emerges in our worldview. We think about it, develop a belief. That belief carries with it an emotional charge, which informs the actions we take, and then we see the results of our given choice. Now, because we don't make decisions in a vacuum, context plays a role, everything from environmental factors to childhood experiences. Now, when it comes to big decisions, this is a pretty good working model. Take buying a house. You're moving to a new city, you need a place to live, you conduct a search, you gather your facts. You create your pros and cons list, you come to a belief about which one to buy, you get excited about the purchase, and you pull the trigger. But to go through this process for every decision, big and small, would be utterly exhausting and impossible from a practical standpoint. If a child runs in front of your moving car, you don't have time to contemplate the various options, you slam on the brakes without a conscious thought. And this makes perfect sense. We want choices like this to be unconscious. We don't want to have to think. Sometimes we have to go directly from fact, child, to emotion, fear, to action, slam on the brakes. The problem, however, is that this unconscious decision-making process can be hacked. If a person is fed a narrative over and over and over again, interpretations will eventually get tossed out the window. You've already made up your mind. Interpretations become unconscious assumptions. And then the beliefs, which once came from considered thought, harden into dogma. Now, when presented with a set of facts, which are most likely pre-selected to match your point of view, you move past thinking and believing straight to your emotions, or fact, emotion, action, result, fear. And it is into this highly emotional environment that we conservatives and libertarians so often drive with our truckload of white papers, charts, graphs, and statistics. We do this because we have the better arguments, right? I mean, if we can just eliminate the ignorance, if we can just teach enough centrists and liberals the truth, all will be well. We also do it because it's how we're wired. The problem is it doesn't work very well with the majority of the population, and here's why. I'm sure many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs personality test at one time or another. According to Myers-Briggs, there are 8 different ways we human beings tend to show up in the world. We're either extroverted or introverted. We either use our intuition or our senses. We either lead with our feelings or our thoughts, and we either perceive or judge. Now, as I'm sure you discovered when you took the test, no one's entirely one way or the other on these different personality traits. We're all somewhere on the spectrum of these different competing functions, and we mix and match them in different delightful combinations. But when it comes to politics, the personality metric that seems to be the best predictor of whether someone's conservative or liberal involves the thinking and feeling functions. In general, conservatives lead with their thoughts and liberals lead with their emotions. And what does it mean to be a thinker? Thinkers make decisions rationally based on the facts and objective criteria. They use logical analysis. They like rules. They like meritocracies. They value truth, justice, and fairness. And they can become frustrated by the people part of life. Thinkers like white papers, charts, graphs, stats, and sound arguments. What does it mean to be a feeler? Well, feelers make decisions based on their personal value systems and social considerations. They're more interested in their moral compass than cold, hard facts. Connections and social relationships are very important to them, and they become frustrated when cold, hard facts are given higher priority over the human experience. Feelers respond to emotional appeals. Feelers like stories. Now for some rough news. When it comes to the American population, 60% are feelers and just 40% are thinkers, which means conservatives and libertarians are in a permanent personality minority. Feelings prevail over thoughts, especially in highly emotional environments. And here are 3 things you need to know about engaging someone who is highly emotional. First, people actually become less intelligent when emotions run high, the equivalent of losing 10 to 15 IQ points, says Psychology Today. But you know this from experience, right? I mean, if you've ever had an argument with your spouse and one of you is jacked up on emotions, I'm sure that there's not a lot of wisdom and illumination coming from those encounters. Second, according to research by Drew Weston at Emory University and confirmed by many other studies, people in emotional dogmatic states will reject all facts that don't support their worldview. And third, due to the principle of confirmation bias, that person will seek out information to confirm the choices they've already made. Here's what all this means. Even the greatest arguments in the world can do more harm than good when deployed in an emotional debate. Because they're directed to people who are cognitively compromised by their emotions, they push people further into the enemy camp and inspire them to scramble for data to reconfirm their bias. So what on earth are we supposed to do? The right's always been consumed with the concept of cognitive dissonance, of creating conflict in the mind of the person we're trying to persuade by providing an unimpeachable argument and lots of data to support it. As we've discussed, the majority of people lead with their emotions and won't be receptive to this approach. What we must do instead is focus on what I call emotional dissonance, or causing people to experience a significant emotional conflict to the point where a new belief begins to emerge. Because let me show you what happens when someone is opened up emotionally. When someone experiences a significant emotional shift, a new belief begins to emerge, and the spin cycle works in reverse. When the emotion of the moment subsides due to confirmation bias, they'll eventually go searching for information, both facts and interpretations, to support this new belief. And let me stop here and make this point. That's why all the intellectual work we do is so vital. Not only does it have an impact on the 40% of the people who are natural born thinkers, people who are often in very influential positions, but feelers will ultimately be looking to those arguments to justify their new beliefs when they come around. And when people find those arguments, if they're compelling and authentic, the spin cycle reverts back to its previous rotation and they move through it with new interpretations, new beliefs, and new actions, and you have a convert. And what is the best method of causing emotional dissonance? Storytelling. I have Tom Cruise pictured here to make the point. The movie Top Gun was one of the greatest military recruitment vehicles ever created. After the film was released, the US Navy stated that the number of young men who joined wanting to be naval aviators went up by 500%. Applications for the Naval Academy skyrocketed, all because of a single story. And research in neuroscience explains why. According to an article recently published in NPR entitled How Stories Connect and Persuade, on functional MRI scans, many different areas of the brain light up when someone is listening to a narrative. Not just the areas involved with language processing, but brain networks involved in processing emotion as well. And the writer concludes, different formats of information, lists, facts, charts, may be better suited to different situations, but stories wield a particularly strong influence over our attitudes and behavior. Strong enough to motivate someone to join the military after watching a movie, and certainly strong enough to change someone's deep-seated beliefs about an emotional topic. Remember the story of the producer I told earlier. This is an example of someone who experienced emotional dissonance through story. That night he spent connecting with wounded warriors, hearing story after story, caused a major emotional shift. A new belief emerged. He had new thoughts about service members and acted on them by coming back to the festival to teach them. This is just one of dozens upon dozens of stories I could relay from the festival experience to make the point. And over time, those stories added up and actually facilitated a major shift in Hollywood for the military. But I want to go beyond the festival and beyond events that involve an in-person experience and discuss a massive socio-emotional shockwave that hit the world last year in the form of a video 8 minutes and 46 seconds long. I'm speaking about the George Floyd video. Black Lives Matter became a force over the last year, but the movement started back in 2013 when George Zimmerman was acquitted in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. A number of other shootings followed involving police officers and Black men. Then in 2017, 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick took a seat during the national anthem to protest police brutality. Kaepernick lost his job, effectively kicked out of the league. NFL ratings plummeted. People seemed more emotionally attached to law enforcement and the military and to the flag than they were to Kaepernick and his cause. Then came the brutal, horrible killing of George Floyd, captured on tape and released for all the world to see. A white police officer kneeling on the neck of a Black man who was begging for his life. That video caused a major emotional schism in this country and changed the debate. The New York Times reported that Black Lives Matter earned more support in the 2 weeks following the release of the video than in the 2 years prior. People who once defended the police suddenly changed their Facebook status to BLM. The NFL added BLM messaging to its football fields, along with other sports leagues as well. And due to the principle of confirmation bias, after the shift, people began to look for arguments to support this new belief. In 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the nation went from supporting the police to defunding them. What happened to George Floyd was a horrifying, tragic, true story that created a tidal wave of emotion across the country, sending people scrambling to make sense of it all. Now, unfortunately, from BLM's perspective anyways, when people went to the organization's website for answers, they didn't find an organization solely dedicated to equality of opportunity. They found an organization preaching Marxism and the destruction of the nuclear family. And as a result, support for BLM has slipped over the last 6 months. They missed an opportunity. However, this provides an opening for the liberty movement because we have answers. We know that liberty is the best way to ensure equal opportunity for everyone, regardless of race, gender, religion, or sexual orientation. We know the combination of philanthropy and capitalism is the best way to solve social problems as opposed to government mandates, and we can prove it. But first, we have to join the conversation, and we have to do it in the right way. I first heard this quote from Morton Blackwell. It's one of his laws of the 44 laws of the public policy process, but Theodore Roosevelt said it. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think it would be helpful to keep these words in mind as we navigate this delicate conversation and the many others in front of us. It won't be easy. People are not in the mood to listen. The threats are real. Many on our side are fearful, and it's going to take time and it's going to take resources. But I believe there's a way, and it's going to involve emotional dissonance and story. And by the way, it doesn't always have to be a sad story. Depending on the issue, a touch of humor might just be the best approach. I don't think it's any accident that the last time the right competed in a major way in culture, we had a former actor in the White House who had a sense of humor, deep appreciation for the respect for the art of storytelling, and understood that politics is ultimately downstream of culture. Numerous books have been written about former President Reagan's use of storytelling and humor to disarm, to persuade, to inspire, and to create unforgettable moments like this one.
I don't know whether you know it or not, but I have a new hobby. I am collecting stories that I can actually prove are told among the Russian people. They make them up themselves, they tell them between themselves, reveals they got a great sense of humor, and they've also got a little cynical attitude about things in their country. And one of these stories, the one I'm going to tell you, I told to General Secretary Gorbachev, and he laughed. The story was an American and a Russian arguing about their two countries, and the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk and say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, you can? He says, yes. I can go into the Kremlin, to the General Secretary's office, pound his desk and say, Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country.
If we're going to compete in culture, once again, we're going to have to follow President Reagan's example. We're going to have to become a master storytellers. And how do we do it? By identifying, training, and supporting people who value liberty and who are also talented in the arts. By working outside the system to find our own production and distribution avenues. And by working within the system to persuade influencers in entertainment to embrace our worldview by finding one thing that they can support and then bringing them along the rest of the way. So that's my time today. I want to thank you all very much for listening. My colleague, Austin Berg, will take it from here.
Thanks so much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. And thank you to Debbie as well and to the Roundtable for doing this. This is such a critical topic. And I'm so glad so many people are on the call listening to this. So just to reintroduce myself, I'm Austin Berg. I serve as the Vice President of Marketing at the Illinois Policy Institute. And I'm also the co-founder of Iron Light, which is a marketing agency that helps purpose-driven brands change the world. And today I want to talk about how we use stories to do that, how you can operationalize them in your organization, and how we need to think of them as part of content strategy to drive attention to our message. If we do not drive attention to our message, we will continue to lose. So I'd like to begin with a story. This is Patricia Hill. Patricia grew up on the south side of Chicago. And when she was a little girl, the beacon of Black prosperity, not just in Chicago, not just in Illinois, but throughout the Midwest, was an area called the South Suburbs. Communities like Madison, communities like Harvey, communities like Calumet City. And Patricia made it. She and her husband moved to Madison in 2003. They bought a house for $315,000. That's where you moved if you made it as a Black professional, and they had made it. I went down to Madison last year and spoke with Patricia. Her home was worth $215,000. She had been on the brink of foreclosure 3 times in the last year, and her property tax bill was $10,000 a year. She said, "I came here for the American dream. It has turned into an American nightmare." One town over in Calumet City is this man, Troy Paraday. He was the superintendent of the Calumet City School District, which services about 1,200 school children. He retired 2 years ago and is making more than $300,000 a year on a taxpayer-funded public pension. He makes more every year than Patricia's dream is worth. And that system, that corrupt system that he is a part of, has stolen home equity from Patricia. It's the reason her property tax bills are so high. And it is the reason that her dream has died. That is how I would like our movement to talk about the public pension issue. Forget about the unfunded liability, forget about retirement ages, forget about compounding interest and investment returns. Tell this story. I think everybody on this call knows that stories are important. It's often forgotten why they are important. They're important because they drive attention, they bring attention to our message. And if we do not bring attention to our message, we will not compete in culture and we will not win. When we think obsessively about this at Iron Light with our clients, and we think obsessively about it at Illinois Policy, we operate in an attention economy. We are not competing against politicians necessarily. We are not competing against other advocacy organizations. We are competing against everything vying for the end user's attention. That includes tweets from the person who is depicted in this slide. It includes attractive people on Instagram. It includes every single brand vying for your end consumer's attention. That's who we need to be competing against. And the way that we think about that competition is a model that informs our content strategy, and it's called SCARF. I'd like to run through it quickly here with you, a couple of key elements. So SCARF was developed in 2008 by a neuropsychologist named David Rock. And it was actually initially developed as a way to improve workplace communication. We use it for outward-facing communication. And it's an acronym, and it stands for elements that elicit a approach or avoid response in people, a fight or flight response. And I want to talk about 3 of these elements today. I don't have time to go through all 5, but 3 elements: certainty, relatedness, and fairness. And we're going to get into how stories fit into that. Certainty is extremely deep within us. Think about coming home from work or coming home from shoveling snow. I'm talking to you from Chicago. You put your keys in the same spot, in the same cup, on the same mantle or shelf every time you come in. As I'm saying these words about your keys, you may find yourself, your own hand moving, or thinking about your hand moving to do that. It comes from a deep, deep, deep sense of certainty. One of the most viral articles that we ever had at Illinois Policy was a headline titled, "Leave your 13-year-old home alone. Illinois police can take her into custody under Illinois law." That triggers a deep sense of uncertainty. I leave my 12-year-old home alone all the time. Police could come and take her. My friend leaves his 11-year-old to take care of the 5-year-old. Police could come to take him. That law changed based on the traffic and attention that single article got, and it's because it appealed to a deep sense of uncertainty. Now I want to talk about relatedness. So the woman on the screen, her name's Claudia Perez. She operates a tamale cart. We were doing a campaign to legalize food carts in Chicago, which had been illegal for decades due to an anti-competitive law that brick and mortar businesses lobbied for. We had a documentary on Claudia. She spoke about how she was harassed by police, how she just wanted to sell her food. And it was 6 minutes long. And I'll remind you, when this documentary was made, this was a time when a lot of marketers said, you can't have a video longer than a minute. You can't have a video longer than 30 seconds. You cannot have a video longer than 6 seconds because these darn kids these days have no attention span. Meanwhile, you've got Joe Rogan interviews that are 3.5 hours long with millions of views, but we'll set that aside for a second. We had a 6-minute documentary and we needed to cut. And one of those cuts, we took out a key scene where Claudia is making her tamales for the day. She takes the viewer through that process. And I had a colleague of mine come and say, we can take out every other part of this video. We can take out the policy explanation, the expert interview. We have to leave that part in. And he was right. We released that project, got 1 million views organically on Facebook. And sure enough, in the comment section, the most lively conversation was around, that's exactly how my grandma makes tamales. Oh, I love tamales oaxaqueños. Those look so good. Oh, I use arbol chilies. Oh, I use jalapenos. It was a conversation around the food and the relatedness to Claudia as a mother and a character. That is very deep. That is very, very deep. And it speaks to our need to find good messengers for our ideas. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Finally, fairness. Some of you who came to our conference for Iron Light Labs in Nashville may have seen me interview this woman on the screen, Lisa Creason. She is a mom from Decatur, Illinois. And when she was 19 years old, she stole money from a cash register at a Subway sandwich shop. She went to prison for a year as a result. Lisa got out of prison. She raised 3 kids by herself. Her fiance was killed by a stray bullet. She started an anti-violence nonprofit. She went to work as a nursing assistant. She moved her kids into a bad part of town to be able to afford to go to school to become a registered nurse. She completed her courses while working and raising a family. And then she got a call from the state that said, you cannot be a licensed registered nurse because of the sin you committed when you were 19 years old. You could tell that story to anyone on the most extreme left or the extreme right, and they will agree with you that that is unfair. So you can imagine we were a bit scared when the largest tax hike proposal in Illinois history was branded the fair tax. This was the key policy priority of Governor J.B. Pritzker when he was elected. He put in $55 million to the campaign. The issue was polling plus 33 in March of last year. And is it any wonder? It was fairness. And we talked to some folks who I think Brandon would probably describe as the thinkers in his presentation, folks on our side on this issue. And we were talking about messaging on the campaign. And they said, we've got it. We'll call it the unfair tax. Ha ha ha, we've got it. Pritzker won't know what hit him. Turns out, terrible message. And Scarf tells us that. The thing about fairness and the thing that our side often forgets about calls to tax the rich, time to make millionaires and billionaires make their fair share. It's not about getting more money for services. It's not about efficient tax policy. It's literally about punishing people for what they see as ill-gotten gains. The SCARF model tells us when people perceive an actor as unfair, when they are punished, you get a dopamine hit. So it's not enough to just call the tax unfair. You have to play in a totally different area. We played in certainty. Illinoisans have the lowest trust in their state government of residents of any other state. You guys might know why. It's for good reasons. So we told the story of how a progressive tax, how the fair tax, would allow a retirement tax in Illinois. Illinois currently doesn't tax retirement income. Every other state with a progressive income tax taxes retirement income. And we told the story of people like Don Vojtovich, the man you see here, retired Chicago police officer, who was afraid that if Springfield politicians unlocked the Constitution to allow this fair tax, they would go after his retirement. We hammered the retirement message all through the spring, all through the summer. We told stories like Don's, and we started making headway. In July, around 20% of Illinoisans were aware that a progressive income tax would make a retirement tax more likely. By October, that number had skyrocketed. Half of Illinoisans over the age of 55 were aware of this message. And unsurprisingly, support swung dramatically against the governor. Saw almost a 20-point increase in opposition among Illinoisans age 55 to J.B. Pritzker's fair tax. This is my favorite slide. So this issue went from a plus 33 in the spring to losing by 7 points on election day. It's because we told the right stories and picked the right message. I can't believe Brandon used the phrase GOAT because I love using it in this presentation. So a lot of questions that I get from policy and advocacy organizations revolve around how do we do this work? How do we do this work well? No one on our team is a storyteller. We don't have photographers. We don't have videographers. We don't want to pay a marketing agency to do it. How do we do it? And I want to show you something embarrassing to teach you how you can do it and how your organizations have to be and should be doing it. Anyone on this call could take a better photo than this. There's no bokeh effect. The subject's out of frame. He's an awkward distance from the camera. His hands are kind of in an odd position. He's got wrinkly shorts. He's got a nice house. That's not relatable at all. But the funny thing is, if you're from the Midwest, from parts of the South, characters like this person, his name's Rich Roth. I would tell him this to his face. He's a nice guy. Look like him. Got a Harley shirt. They got the NASCAR sunglasses you get from the gas station. You got cargo shorts on. You told Rich's story. He was thinking about moving his business out of the state because of the high tax burden. And people related to it. We used a model that was pioneered by Humans of New York, taking simple portrait photography and a long form quote. Rich's story reached nearly 1 million people with no paid spend because his story evoked a deep sense of relatedness. Another question I often get from folks is around how to find stories. How do you find people like Lisa? How do you find people like Rich? How do you find people like Claudia? You have to be curious, you have to be brave, and you have to fail every day. John Tillman once told me, everyone is a fundraiser now. I would like to tell you that everyone is a storyteller now. Your Uber driver, delivery person, plumber who comes to fix something at your house, folks you talk to at church, your neighbors, talk to them and ask them what they think about the issues that you're working on, and you will be surprised to see what you find. But you have to be brave enough to ask, and you have to be thinking about using stories to draw attention to your message. So if you don't believe me, I would like to bring in who I describe as the other storytelling goat, Ira Glass, of This American Life, and see what he says about making storytelling a part of your organization and failing a lot.
Like one of the things I think that it's really hard that nobody ever tells you if you want to do creative work is how hard it is to actually find a decent story. And I think that we all think like, well, the real work of it is I'm going to go out and I'm going to shoot the thing and then I'm going to sit and edit it and I'm going to write it and it's going to put music under it, like whatever, and that's going to be where time is. But often, and people don't really tell you this, often the amount of time finding the decent story is more than the amount of time it takes to produce the story. And that if somebody wants to do creative work, you actually have to set aside just as much time for the looking for stories. I mean, I work on a national radio show and we don't follow the news, we don't do anything. All we do is look for interesting stories, and there's 7 of us or 8 of us now. And I gotta say, like, more than half of our week is simply engaged in the looking for stories and then trying stuff out. And like, we're really good at our jobs, right? We're as good as, you know, anybody who does this kind of thing. And I gotta say, like, we take a run at a lot of stories, and between a half and a third of everything that we try, we'll go out, we'll get the tape, and then we kill it. And you should think of it the same way. That, like, you know, you thought it was going to be good, you went out, you did the interview, the person wasn't such a great talker, they weren't so funny, they weren't so emotional. Somehow when they told it to you in person with the camera, it wasn't the way they told you when they talked to them on the phone beforehand. They just got a little intimidated by the camera, just something in the chemistry was wrong. You can't even name what it is, and why even bother to try? Like, and then, but then when you look at the footage, you know that there's a feeling that you had about it, which isn't in the footage, right? And then it's time at that point to be the ambitious, super achieving person who you're going to be, and to kill it. It's time to kill, and it's time to enjoy the killing, because by killing, you will make something else even better live. And I think that, like, not enough gets said about the importance of abandoning crap. And one thing that you know you should know is that all video production is trying to be crap. Like, in fact, all radio production is trying to be crap. Basically, it's like the laws of entropy. You know, that thing where, like, the universe is, all the energy of the universe is dissipating, and like all the atoms are getting lower and lower in energy. Well, basically, like anything that you put on tape, from the moment you put it on tape, like, basically it's trying to be really bad. It's trying to be unstructured. It's trying to be pointless. It's trying to be boring. It's trying to be digressive, much like these sentences that I'm saying right here. And pretty much you have to prop it up aggressively at every stage of the way if it's going to be any good. Like, you have to be really like a killer about, like, getting rid of the boring parts and going right to the parts that are, like, getting to your heart. And you just have to be ruthless if anything is going to be good. Things that are really good are good because people are being really, really tough, and you're going to be really tough in doing it.
Let's abandon crap. Let's tell better stories. Let's all be storytellers, and let's draw attention to the message. Thanks very much for listening to me. Looking forward to the conversation with Debbie and Brandon.
Wow, guys. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Austin. My takeaway from the last few minutes was be a ruthless killer for the right reasons. So, okay, I think there's a lot to talk about here, and really appreciated both of you presenting the way you approach the whole topic of storytelling and the theory that kind of underlies that. So here we have thinkers who are helping us feel, and that was definitely how I interpreted the way you were approaching the whole topic. But we had, Brandon, from you, this whole idea of the spin cycle and what can happen in the spin cycle. And I'm curious about something that we are talking about a lot these days in our country, this whole idea of polarization and people being so divided that we have this extra challenge, you know, in terms of reaching people. How would you apply your spin cycle to the whole topic of polarization? And how do you see that maybe being a way to start addressing it?
Sure. Well, first off, we talked a little bit about, or I talked a little bit about the idea that when you lob arguments back and forth, what ultimately ends up happening is you drive people further away. Really what the spin cycle is about in emotional dissonance and storytelling is to use stories to engage in conversation, to open up conversation. I think that's part of what we're missing right now. Early on in the days of the GI Film Festival, we're invited numerous times to make this a political event, right? And to preach to the choir and to raise money that way. We went a different route. And we, instead of firebombing the hill, we sort of took it slowly and built and won some friends and some influencers on the way up to the top of the hill. And I think that worked quite well for us. We used story to engage in conversation. We weren't afraid to engage with people with whom we disagreed. And then over time, as I said, you bring them into the camp, and over time, you have an opportunity to educate once you can open the conversation.
Great. Okay. I think there's probably a lot there for us to think about and unpack over time. And I can't wait to actually have a chance to talk more with you about this. Austin, same question for you around polarization. If you were to take the SCARF model, and there are some touch points, obviously, between what you described as SCARF and the spin cycle that Brandon was talking about, how would SCARF apply to tackling this issue of polarization? It's almost like a pre-story issue that we're all thinking about. How would you tell us about how SCARF applies?
Well, sometimes we're in the polarization game, I'll say, and it's important if you get again back to attention on the message. A lot of times I think we can overthink the persuasion angle, but we're not even getting the attention of the people that we need in the first place. That's where SCARF comes in. But I think at the same time, what I've seen on issues like criminal justice reform actually are one example, but sometimes are almost too easy to get people to agree on because that sense of fairness is so top of mind. When you tell stories like, for example, the one I told at the beginning, Patricia and Troy Paraday, people come at those stories not with their political brains on. They're coming at it from who are the characters and what are they doing? And when that happens, it's very difficult to even have an argument because the lived experience of someone like Patricia is not up for debate. You're just simply telling her story. This is sort of the same thing I found that works really well in labor issues, right? You could have the most highest opinion of public sector labor, but once you hear the story of my friend Joe O'Cool, who was kicked out of his union for going to teach his kids who he thought that day would be shot and killed, there's nothing to argue about. So I think that hopefully addresses some of the polarization question you're talking about.
Yeah, and the way you opened your whole answer about sometimes we are in the polarization game, I think is something worth us all talking more about and thinking about. So I want to turn to another topic that Brandon, it came up in a little bit in your presentation, but we have a question here specifically around Black Lives Matter. And the question is, any tips for avoiding the mistake of BLM? Namely, losing a new audience that gives you support based on a single issue narrative, and then they are turned off by the larger agenda, which seems to have happened, right? A lot of people attracted to Black Lives Matter in the moment, and then as they dug deeper, they realized there was a bigger agenda. It seems, the questioner goes on, it seems like many organizations fighting for our cause could fall into the same trap. How do we build a bridge for a new single issue audience to our bigger picture so they don't get turned off in the process?
Yeah, I think Austin and I are going to be on the same page with this. I call it using first date behavior. I mean, when you go on a first date, you don't tell everybody everything about yourself in that one situation, or there won't be a second date, right? But over time, you develop a relationship. When you're in a relationship, that changes things, and then you can begin to talk about deeper issues, et cetera. So I really think it's about, and I think Austin, you can speak to. You guys use the term low friction, but it's really about using an issue. I said, I think at the end, find something that everyone can agree on, bring them in, and then bring them along. And I think that's the right approach.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
We call it low friction issues on our side, and often our most mature and largest audiences that we've created for the folks we work with, they're built on those bread and butter issues. A gas tax hike that everybody hates, that 13-year-old, leaving 13-year-old home alone, things like that, where you can get people in cost effectively to opt into your email list, but you have to do the second step. I think people, it's easy for folks to understand that step. You really have to handhold them down, whether that's a welcome series or a retargeting campaign, to educate them about other parts of your brand. That is really effective, but it's essential if you're to avoid the problem that Brandon was talking about, where people feel tricked or propagandized too.
I follow up on that a little bit, because I do think this is something a lot of organizations are thinking about. We get this low friction entry point, and that makes sense. And we don't want people to feel tricked. But at a certain point, there could just be fundamental disagreement. And so is that to be expected in this process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's to be expected that, sometimes people are just not going to be receptive to the message, and they're probably not the right people to have within your ecosystem, at the end of the day. So absolutely. I mean, you have to stay true to your principles, no question about it. It's just really all about engaging in conversation and getting it started. And then after that, over time, we'll become, more aware of the full agenda or your full principles.
Yeah. Austin?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, it's a cost question. Like, would you rather have 5,000 people come onto your list on one issue and 10% of them drop off after you talk about something that isn't as relevant to their interests? Or would you rather only have the 50 people who are going to be that engaged on the issue you want to talk about it on the front end? I would say the former approach is better.
Can I just add one thing?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we really lean in the direction as a movement towards the opposite extreme, which is this is who we are and either take it or leave it. So I feel like if we're going to err on one side, we should probably pull back a little bit from that. Still, obviously, always stay true to your principles, but just realize the value of engaging with people and persuading. We've just lost the art of persuasion, I think.
All right, I have more questions I want to ask you guys, but let me ask the audience's questions. So we have one here. I think, obviously, Brandon, I'm thinking that your discussion about the veterans must have resonated with this person. Here's a question. There are very few portrayals of disability on screen, and when it's there, it is often with a pity and handout frame. Studies show that most people with disabilities want to work, and that they can bring great talents and success. So this sounds a little bit like your situation with the veterans, and person is asking, what are your suggestions to help people with disabilities so they can be seen on screen for what they can do in terms of education, employment, and entrepreneurship?
Gosh, it's a big question, and it's so important. And it's really, one of the things we had to fight as a film festival is this idea of the victimization of people in the military. That they're victims of circumstances. Just much like Joel Stein's quote, they're tricked. They had to be tricked into joining the military versus making their own choice. And then, yes, when veterans came home, there was a whole issue of not seeing them as valuable members of the economy and people who you could hire and work with. So that was a major priority for us. The question of how you address that problem, it's not easy. I mean, we did it. It took us 7 years to really begin to turn around the narrative around the military. So I would just say that, really focus on telling stories, flood the market with the alternative narrative. That's what I would say. Find stories where people are, have a disability, but they're succeeding. Find ways to get that into the ether. And would be step one. Step two is tough, as I said.
Yeah. But that's a starting point, at least. Austin? You have any thoughts there?
I agree totally with what Brandon said. I would add that for campaigns like that, one of the most important things to do is ask people who you're fighting on behalf of what they would do or what they need. I think it can be easy, especially in the policy space, to come from an ivory tower perspective on the policy issues you talk about. But I believe this is in the Bible, but a shepherd should smell like his sheep. You need to know the struggles and concerns of the folks that you're talking about, and your product and stories will be much better for it. Even if you're not telling stories, if you're doing other work or media, anything, if you can understand the concerns of that community better, all your work will be better for it.
All right, terrific. I'm just going to take a couple of questions here that are really easy. Austin, we also have a question. Somebody would like to read more about your SCARF model. Do you guys have something in writing that you can share with the audience? If not now,
absolutely,
we can get that question over to you.
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So we are actually coming to the end of our time, and I wanted to ask each of you, is there something, if you had one takeaway that you were hoping the audience leaves with in terms of what we as a movement need to do to embrace this? We can impact the culture. It is not lost. Hollywood is not completely lost. Brandon, I kept thinking that as your presentation went on. What's the one thing you want them to take away? And I'll start with Brandon.
So For a very long time, I've just been making the argument that we as a movement need to appreciate the value of storytelling. So it starts with a commitment to it. Let's not just say the words, politics is downstream of culture, which I've heard at conservative events for 20 years. Let's embrace them, and let's actually put resources behind people who are fans of liberty, but also are very talented. So it's about identifying, training people who are talented, supporting them, getting their stories out there. Would be the one thing I would say to take away.
Great, thank you. And Austin, your takeaway?
Sell storytelling to your leadership team and to your donors. If you have questions about it, email me. It's austin@ironlight.com. And if none of the arguments that were said today convinced you to commit to this, I would make a selfish appeal to your own self-interest that if you do this work or work with people who do this work, your life will materially improve through the relationships and interesting people and love that you share with the folks that you partner with on this work.
Right. Well, I have a feeling this is just the beginning. I mean, this is a conversation that the movement's been having for a while. I hope that this re-energizes that conversation. I know the two of you are talking to lots of organizations. I encourage the organizations who are represented on the call to join that conversation and be part of helping to improve our overall storytelling. It's a very important topic for the roundtable. We've got a whole set of investments that we're making to get the resources we need to help tell the story of philanthropy and capitalism much better than we do now. So please join us in that effort. And we encourage you to stay in touch with the roundtable because we are doing a lot of programming on this, but on many other topics that probably touch your mission. So if you're not already getting the roundtable roundup, we encourage you to sign up for that. And we're going to put up some information in the chat about how you do that. And I'm going to take a moment to thank all of you for being here today, and Brandon and Austin for sharing your original thoughts on how we tell stories better. Thanks everyone for being here today, and we will follow up with you and see you soon. Take care.